Welcome to A Diary of a Professional Tennis Coach with Mark Gellard and Candy Reed, sponsored by the ERT 300. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another edition of Diary of a Professional Tennis Coach. We've been about through the mill of guests with coaches, with strength and conditioning. We've even had a neuroscientist on. Today, we have the excitement of having one of the world's best stringers on the call. Curt Stefan, it is an absolute privilege to have you on the podcast. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
We've actually had another stringer before, creator of the Knot, and it was a very successful Diary of a Professional Tennis Coach. And I wondered if you had a special knot that you did or anything special about your stringing to start with.
I don't know if there's anything special about it because majority of the top stringers in the world will string the same way.
Okay.
I was just a little bit my background. I was trained by Warren Bosworth. If anybody from the 70s, 80s, and 90s knows anything about racket technology, he was the godfather of putting all this together. So I feel very privileged that I was lucky enough to be trained by him, and also my former boss, Nate Ferguson, who is the owner of P1.
Oh, okay. So how firstly did you meet Warren, and what specifically was he good at, and why was he kind of the godfather?
I originally was working for a tennis magazine show. It was a magazine show for actually the magazine, Tennis Magazine, back in the 80s.
Oh, yes.
And I was the producer and editor for that show for 4 years. The show went off the air. We were renting space from Warren Bosworth and Bosworth International. I walked down the hallway, got a job with them, and they loved it because I'd never had any experience with stringing. I played a little bit of tennis in high school, but that was about it. But what they loved about it is that I wasn't, I didn't have any bad habits. So train me the way they felt was the best way to be successful in stringing top professionals.
Oh, that makes sense. Because a lot of tennis coaching, especially when you work with people that have played a little bit but want a bit of help, they always come with bad habits. So actually, for a tennis coach, it's preferable to have someone that doesn't have any experience of playing at all, because then you can start off on the right foot. Right. Lovely to say that Mark Gellard is alongside Mark from Rome. Mark, how's it going?
Hey guys, how are you? Good to see you. Sorry I couldn't make it at the start, but everything good here. We had a good day of practice, and we're actually playing tomorrow morning at first match at 11.
Oh, you look like, for those who are just listening and not watching, you look like you've got a good suntan. Hasn't been that warm though, has it?
It hasn't, but the last few days have been pretty nice. When there's we had a bad day of rain yesterday for a few hours, but overall it's actually been pretty good in Rome this year. It's been warmer than past years.
All right, good. And now the reason I know Curt is because he was on your coaching conference, Mark. So just give us an idea of how you found Curt and how perhaps he found you.
That's actually a good question. I would say, Curt's really well known in the Delray Boca area. I mean, he's been doing this longer than I've been alive, I think. So he's the guru of Delray Boca, and everyone goes to him for everything from racket customization, stringing, weight and balancing, all that kind of stuff. And he works with the best players on the WTA and ATP. So he's really well known and respected. And he's helped me with Magda for years, and also some other players I've helped on the side here and there. So he's got a lot of knowledge and experience, and does a really good job. So he was also great. He came on like as you just mentioned, Candy, with our webinar we did recently, and gave a lot of insights into what he does and how he does it, and what things people should be looking for when they're looking for racket customization or things of that nature. So it's been really a good asset to have there. And we thought we'd lost him for a while. Actually, he was planning on moving up to Central Florida, but I convinced him not to eventually. So we can't have him doing it.
Was that for the USTA, Curt, in Orlando?
Actually, it was not. It was my wife was getting transferred for her job, so I was kind of going to follow her up there.
Oh, I see. You would have had plenty of work still.
Yes. Yeah, there's not, where I was going, there was not too much tennis, put it that way. So
Okay.
I would have been retiring basically from the tennis industry if I would have done that move. But happy enough that I'm still staying in the area that I'm in now, down in Boca and Del Rey, and can work with a huge amount of players that are moving to the area now. And business is picking up a lot from everybody coming to Florida and South Florida in particular.
Yeah, it's a bit of a hotbed, isn't it, for tennis? Either tennis players live in, it seems like Dubai, Monaco, or Florida. Those are the three places. So give us an idea of how hard you work, who you've worked with. Do you ever travel?
I'll answer the last question first. No, I never travel. I ended up, when I was with Warren Bosworth and Bosworth International, they were at the end of their traveling. Everything converted over to FedEx and shipping around the world because it was a lot more easier, economically efficient to do something like that. They before I got there, they would, in the 80s, travel around the world from tournament to tournament with 2 to 3 stringers. One being, who I mentioned earlier, Nate Ferguson from P1. I got on when I joined with them. They were done with the traveling, still working with a lot of the top players in the world. We do everything, as I mentioned, a lot of the players when they're in town. My season is basically from the end of October through December, when what they call the preseason. Everybody's in, everybody's testing string, everybody's testing different specs, and that's when we can go on the court with them during their training, and we can get hopefully everything right, Mark, everything nailed down before you get on the road to Australia.
Most of it.
Yeah. So we can do a lot within those 2 to 2.5 months locally.
Okay.
So
there's no holiday, no vacation for you between October and December?
No. And it's just starting to be almost like the tennis tour. No vacation around the world, around the calendar, because it's I deal with a lot of academies here too, so there's always juniors in town and stuff like that we're dealing with. So
in a typical day, how many rackets are you stringing?
Oh, it can fluctuate. Like during probably the height of the season, which is the preseason, I'll be doing probably on an average probably 15 to 18 to 20 rackets a day. I'm putting in probably a 16-hour day, and between being on the court, picking up rackets, talking to players, and stringing, and the weight and balance. I have another gentleman that worked with me at Bosworth that works with me also, does all the weight and balance, John, and he does the handle work for us. We're, as Mark can attest to, we're booked up to the max during those 3 months, and even out from there a little bit more. Okay. So,
Mark?
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say, like when we, as Curt knows, in December time, that's when, in November, he gets calls from me at midnight or texts at 5 a.m. when we need strings changed last minute or weights done or grips adjusted. So that's the time the players have, though. That's really the only time of the year where players have a chance to maybe make changes, or it can be small things. Curt has been with us for a while now, and he's helped us with. We've gone from a racket, we changed from Babolat to Yonex. We've changed strings a couple of times. We've adjusted the weights, and that tends to happen now for us anyway. Always tinkering around with the weight a little bit. And I was talking to another tennis coach recently who sort of said he knows a lot of people in golf, and they're often surprised at how little players change in tennis, because when they go to golf events, golfers are constantly adjusting everything on their clubs, whether it's because of the wind or the course layout or the way they're feeling, things, so many variables. The tennis players, if you look, and I often speak with juniors or transition players that maybe just finishing college even, and they're using the same racket weight, strings, everything balanced that they were using when they were 13. But you would expect that changes, right? As the players got stronger and more powerful, that the racket would maybe get heavier, the strings would be adjusted. So I think you know, it's an invaluable to have somebody like Curt, and he has not just him, but like he's mentioned John as well, that helps him out a lot with the other stuff as well. I think it's good to have a team of people there that can sort of be able to help with all of your needs in this, because it's getting more and more important for tennis.
Curt, do you find that the trend now for racket weight is coming down, or is it going up?
Yeah, I want to touch on what Mark said about changing. The top pros that we were dealing with and that I've dealt with in the past, being number one, my first pro was Ivan Lendl. He was very meticulous about when he went to the grass, he went to a bigger head size in the frame. He went to a different string. He went to a different weight. Those little things in my book, from what I've been doing in the last 35 years, that's what makes a player different from a pro player. Somebody who can manipulate the conditions and where they're going and what they're doing, and make their equipment fit for where they're at, instead of just the same old grind, so to speak, of using, like Mark said, coming out of college and then using that same racket. Because you're not playing college players anymore. You're playing top pros, and you have to have something. The equipment in your hand has to be able to combat what you're out there doing. So it's mind-boggling. I try to educate. My thing now on this side of it is, after all these years, to try to educate these younger players on strings and tensions. And because, I mean, there's, believe it or not, the first thing I ever saw was Stefan Edberg down at Key Biscayne at Lipton practicing with Ivan, and he couldn't put a grip on the racket. Yeah, we're watching him and we're all laughing, because that's what we do every day is put grips on, and he was putting it on upside down, backward. He had no clue. But no knock against him. I think he's done well enough without knowing how to put a grip on. But there are certain players and people, and I think players should know everything inside and out about their equipment, and they don't. I mean, I've had players where I pick rackets up and go, "What's your tension?" He goes, "I don't know. Let me text my coach." I'm like, "Yeah, that's exactly what I do, Candy. I put my hands in my head, and you know." And I'm getting to the point where I just want to deal with professional players now, because it's like, I'm not babysitting, and I don't want to. You know, I'm not the person to be. You know, maybe I am. Who knows, to educate these people, but their coaches should be on that a little bit more too, and update them on that. Their equipment, I don't see, it'd be like a race car driver going out there and not knowing what kind of tires are on their car. You know, just things like that. Those little things in this industry is what drives me nuts with professional players or aspiring players that want to be on the pro tour. And I always say, hitting 1,000, 1,000,000 balls isn't going to make you a pro. There's everything in between it. Yvonne used to get on Andy all the time about having 3 pairs of shoes, having this, having that. When you go to court, you should be prepared to go and do your work. And I always draw off of that. Yvonne obviously was a big influence on me and everything that he's done. I've, you know, obviously listened and been around it a lot to understand that those little things add up to make somebody the top pro players. Because as Mark can tell you from Magna and other players, the higher you get, those little things are so big that you need to have those in your arsenal, and you need to have it all in a line and ready to go when you're playing top players.
That's so funny. You mentioned the shoes with Andy Murray, because I don't know if you remember the whole Shoegate scandal. I think it was Murray left his shoes under his hire car or something, and they got stolen and had to have a pair flown in, and it was just crazy. You think about these top level professionals who are so articulate and particular about every little detail, and then they don't have an extra pair of shoes. It's crazy.
Right. Yeah. And I see it. I even see it in most of the players today, where there's certain things I just stand back, listen, and watch, and it's amazing just to be in that environment and see what I can pick out what they're not doing or what they're supposed to be doing, but easier than they can. It's amazing to see that.
So just give us an idea, if you're working with Mark and Magda then in the off season, what is the process? How does it work? Are you on court with them both?
I've gone on court with Mark and Magna a couple times where we would go out, and the thing for me is I will get a lot of feedback from the coach, because the coach is the one that's driving the ship, so to speak, and wants the player to do certain things, and we'll discuss on where they want to go with it, what they want to work on, what they want to get better this year coming up, and their goals and this and that. And as far as the racket goes, I can give them ideas of, like, maybe we'll test a different string, or maybe we'll test a different weight and balance, and certain little things like that. Because for majority of the point, when they get to a certain level, and tennis players are known for having the same thing over and over again, consistency. Like every top player probably, on the men's that I worked with all through the 90s and 2000s, they all had rackets from when they played 16, 17 years old. And their manufacturers, obviously made that racket and then put the cosmetic of what was ever in the store on it. So they're very, superstitious about not wanting. But if we can get the player and working with the coach, and this is great, because this makes a great coach. Somebody that convey something to a player and make them believe in it. And Mark did that with Magna when they went to the switch from the Babolat to the Yonex, because there was a couple things in there that maybe didn't make her game better, but it made other things better. And in my philosophy is those things that made Magna's, and I always used to text Mark during matches over the last 3 or 4 years, and I just give him a little brainy mojo. Once she wraps her brain around it and is comfortable, then it's, the sky's the limit. So when they made that switch to Yonex, maybe the ball speed was a couple miles an hour or less, but she was so confident in that racket that she could go out and play and do anything she wanted, that those miles an hour didn't really come into play. So things like that. And that's what I look at in players. If you can get a player to understand, not so much change to a whole 180, but to add to it a little bit here and there. And like we did with Mark and Magna, as soon as obviously the Australian Open, she exploded with that Yonex racket, and everything fell into place. Now she's probably more confident she probably has been in her whole tennis career with that racket. And I think that's more of a play on it than having the best string in the racket, so to speak. So,
Okay.
I think, Curt, if you were for a lot of people that are listening, what you're a club player, junior player, transition player, what are you thinking is the most important things that they should be paying attention to with their equipment? Is it strings? Is it the grip size? Is it the weight and balancing? Is it the racket itself and the choice of racket? What would your advice be? Because I know, like, for maybe some players that don't have access, to you or the resources to have access to people like you, what would be your biggest advice to those kinds of players?
Out of probably within the equipment of the racket, saying the racket, the handle, the grip, the string, or the 4 major things obviously you're dealing with, the racket is the least. The string is probably the most important, because if you have a bad string at a bad tension, doesn't matter what the racket or what the weight and balance is or what the handle is. And then you would go down the racket and go to the handle and make sure the handle obviously fits in the hand. And my little stickler is changing the overgrip if you're using an overgrip, because that's the cheapest and least expensive thing that you can do to prevent injuries. Because once your grip gets dirty, old, slippery, then you're gripping harder and you're starting to get injuries in your elbows and your shoulders. That's going to be the first thing to cause it. The weight and balance, that's for, I would think, higher advanced players. Definitely, if you do want to put a little bit of weight in it, it's not bad for you, because it's going to combat the shock, obviously, if you can get somebody to do it properly for you. And then the racket, like I said, is probably the least. But you have, in the racket world, you have your 4 or 5 major manufacturers, from whatever, the Yonex, the Wilson, the Babolat, the Technofiber, and Head. any of those 5 rackets that you're going to pick up off the shelf. Now, there are different inside those manufacturers. There are different ones that you want to pay attention to. For somebody who's starting out or somebody on a lower level doesn't want to pick up a Djokovic racket, a speed racket, because that has no power whatsoever for it. And it's totally going to probably confuse the game of what they're trying to learn. There are different, with the different manufacturers, you can get more power out of certain rackets. And that's all they can, with Googling or online and going through and reading all the reviews, you can kind of fit where a beginner to an advanced player, what they're going to be using on the racket end of that now. But the racket is probably the least out of all those. The string and the tension is huge, because if you can't get a decent string in there, or you put the wrong string in and you get an injury, your tennis game is going to be shot. Once you get an injury, it's hard to bounce back from it and get 100%.
Go into that more. So what is the wrong string? So I string a little bit, and some players I string for are beginners, and I'd put, say, all synthetic. A little bit better, I'd maybe put some poly with synthetic, and then I personally play with full poly. So what would you recommend?
What you just said was probably the exact way I would do it too, because and I've had it before where I had younger players and beginners where I don't want to put them on a poly because it's kind of harsh, and they're gonna, and I get this with some of my retail clientele too that I have. They'll put a poly in and they'll leave it in for 6 months, which is the worst thing that you could do, because that string after probably 2 weeks, and especially in the area we're in, Florida, with the heat, is going to be dead, and there's no resilience in the string. They're going to start swinging harder, gripping harder, and then they're going to end up having arm problems out of it. So a synthetic, a lot of people they stay away from it, but the best string, and Candy, you probably know from your playing days, is gut, natural gut.
Yes, but expensive.
Expensive, but here's the thing, and I tried to weigh this out for some of my clients, and especially ones that have arm problems. I always put them on gut.
Yes.
If you're US dollars, paying probably about $65 for a set, and then it's going to cost you probably 20 to 30 to get it strung. So it's expensive, $90 to get a string job. But that string job is more friendly to you and will hold and maintain tension for as long as you probably have that in there. We pulled a Gerolitis racket out when I was at Bosworth's that they strung late 80s, and my boss went and hit with it, and it was still probably about 2 pounds off of when they strung it in the 80s.
What?
Yes.
Is that right? That's unbelievable.
Natural gut will just die off a very little, and then it'll hold because it's natural. It's not a synthetic. So I convey that to them. If my player's not breaking strings, go for a $90 string job, and you can play with it for 6 months to a year, and as long as you're not breaking it, then there's no issue with it, and it's going to feel great, so.
For a junior player, sorry, Candy, sorry.
No, you go, Mark.
What's that?
No, for a junior player or a pro player just starting out, how do you advise them to restring in terms of, some players don't break strings that much, right? So, even Magda now, we never really stringing rackets because we broke the strings. It's more the tension dies out. She wants the fresh string in there, wants all the rackets to be the same. So, at this level, I don't think you see in the pros that many times strings breaking, because players are going in with 6 rackets restrung before a match, and they're rotating those rackets every 7 to 9 games. So they're not getting to the point where they're breaking strings. But what are you saying to the parents of a junior player, 15 years old, that's, wants to be college or pro? They're not breaking their strings. Should they still be getting string jobs? We worked with the ERT 300. We've talked about this before on this show, and how we use that as a way to see if the strings have still got some tension left in them. What's your philosophy on that for players? Because I think that's a question I get asked a lot.
There's 3 things you kind of touched on, I think all of them. The one was with your gauge. if you are able to have a meter to put on there and check it when it's strung, and then check it, you can see the tension dipping off as you're going. Obviously, if that tension gets down, if you want to put it in a world of 4 to 5 pounds or this or that, then that's when it's going to be restrung. Couple things I do with the juniors is, because it's hard for them to realize they can't keep track of, like, the pro players, of the hours that they're playing with the racket, or the sets, or how many balls they hit with it. But what I tell them is, all you have to do is just move the string in your fingers. Paulie is great at this, and 90% of my juniors and up and coming players are playing with Paulie. That's the way of the tennis world string is now. But move that string over, and if you see a notch in it, like a little half moon, then you're ready to get that thing strung, because that means that you've been moving that string, and it's going to break eventually. But once you see a notch in it, that means that you're getting too close to time. For somebody who can't relate and they can physically look at it, that's a good marker for them to. If you move the string to the side and you see a notch in it, then you're looking at trying to get it restrung then from there. But there's and I don't know if you're getting at this or not, Mark. There's not a specific time frame of, if I hit 15 hours for it, then let's change it, because you don't know in those 15 hours what the weather was like, how many balls they actually hit, and I would say over a time span, if somebody puts a set of Paulie in it and they have it in it for a week and a half and they played every day, then that's just ridiculous. They need to be changed out, because it's obviously going to be very dead and non-resilient.
That's I think a lot of people don't have necessarily the access to what players like Magda have, but we make sure that before every match she has at least 3 to 4 rackets strung brand new that haven't been used before she walks onto the court, and she's going to change that racket every time the balls are changed. So after 7 games, and then every preceding 9, and also we try to keep a track of. It's a rough track, and I should do a better job of it, but of how many times each racket frame has been restrung. So I find some players, for example, on the ITF tour, maybe they make some sort of, I would say, schoolboy mistakes by finding one racket that they like in particular, and that racket constantly is their favorite, right? That's strung and strung and strung. So if they've got 4 rackets in their bag, that frame A has been strung 100 times, and the other 3 frames have only been strung 30. And so that has a big impact on, for me, how the frame feels. And whenever we get our new batch of Yonex rackets every season, Magda always says how crisp they feel, the new ones. They play differently because they've got some more life in them. Yep. Also, sort of finding some players I've seen that have four rackets in the bag, and what they'll do is they'll play for an hour or 2 with every racket in the bag, so that they feel like they've broken all the strings in and they've got an equal amount of wear on each of the 4 rackets. Right. But I explained to them that's a really bad way to go, because you could be on the edge of breaking all 4. Yeah, so you use the first one and that snaps, and then the second one and snaps, and you're out of rackets then, right? So it's some things there like this that's really important for players to be aware of.
Yeah, and if there's a player coming up, the simplest thing and I think we did with Magnus, is number them 1 through 6 or 8 or how many they got, and that way you can kind of keep an order on it. But case in point, you're talking about using one racket. That's the reason that we're in business, to make every racket exactly the same. So when you go to your bag and pull it out, there's not a favorite. And a lot of the juniors get stuck. What Mark just said is getting one racket in their hand and playing with it and playing. What happens is, same thing that happened with Tommy Haas when he was with Muscle. He played with 2 rackets all the time and broke them down so much that when Dunlop went to make more rackets, they couldn't make them soft enough for him, because from what he did playing with those for over a year, breaking down 2 rackets, they can't reproduce that, because that was done on court. And we had a nightmare. He was down to, the flex on his was down to like 36 or something at one point, from starting at like 60. But you don't want to get caught up with just one racket in your hand. if you have multiple rackets, you got to use them over and over, all of them at the same time, to be consistent with them, so you don't have a so-called favorite model that you're going to run to.
That's really good advice. I'd love to know about the manufacturers. What I've been told is that Yonex are made in Japan. All the other manufacturers, including Head, which is what I play with, are made in China. And the process of making the racket is quicker in China than it is in Japan. So therefore, the Yonex overall quality is better. Now, this podcast is sponsored by no racket manufacturer at all. So I'm just asking this in terms of interest. But is that something that you have knowledge of, Curt?
Yes. In particular, we did Leighton Hewitt's rackets back in the late 90s and early 2000s. And obviously, he played with Yonex. My old boss, Warren Bosworth, was good friends with the owner of Yonex. And we had a few clientele, Celis and everybody on Yonex at that time. They are, for the lack of a better term, the tightest as far as specs coming out of the factory of any manufacturer. And the reason is the Japanese are very sticklers on on product that they put out. We had Weight and Balance Leighton Hewitt's, and they got really upset with us because they saw them on TV with silver stripes on the sides of 3 and 9 o'clock. So we told him, he wanted it Weight and Balance and more weight. So what they did is the next batch they did, the cosmetics, had silver paint on the 3 and you go back and look at his old rackets, the burnt orange ones have silver on the 3 and 9 o'clocks, because they took it personally as the inferior product. Where in China, that I know of, and I've known people that have gone to the factories are like a couple factories that are a couple hundred football fields long, and you'll have Wilson being built, you'll have Babolat being built, and then you have hockey sticks being built, and then you'll have whatever else graphites being built in that same factory all the way down. And their throw off, what we call throw off as far as margin of error for plus and minus, when they put that little plus and minus on there, their throw off is huge. I mean, their length is huge on it. So obviously, if one's 20 grams off, they're still putting it out there to the average player, because if they throw it out, then they're losing money. Where the Yonex, the Japanese and Yonex are very tighter, and that's why their process is a little bit slower and more consistent, so to speak. So they have less waste, but they have a better product coming out of their factory.
Oh, that's very interesting.
I think that the Yonex racket is, the Yonex, I think it's almost sort of within the industry, it's a pretty much accepted fact that Yonex are the gold standard of rackets in terms of quality. I think most people would agree with that. I mean, I think, don't get me wrong, Magda loved Babolat when she used Babolat, and they were a fantastic company to work with. But she is, I mean, Yonex, just the way that their rackets play and the way that they look after her, and just overall the quality of their service. And I think there's an interesting trend that's happened where so many players now are working with Yonex. I mean, and I understand there's endorsements and sponsorships and everything like that, and money is always a part of it. But in the tour, players will only use rackets that they're comfortable with. It doesn't matter how much money you throw at somebody. If they don't have a racket they're comfortable playing with, they're just not going to do it. And so I think if you look now, how many players in the last 5 years, plus or minus, have switched to Yonex, and particularly their E-Zone and their V-Core. It's incredible. I mean, they're just such a great company. And Japan is, in Japanese products in general are considered superior to almost anything, whether it's cars or electronics. So I think it's a great company to work with. And I encourage all the junior players I work with, and anyone looking at getting into tennis, I just think it's a great racket to have.
And it's no.
But we aren't sponsored by Yonex. I just want to be clear. I'm not advocating on behalf of Yonex. But I really believe in their products. I think they do a great job with the rackets, the string, the over grips are great, the bags are great. They've done a great job. And
I'm not sponsored by any manufacturer either. If they want to, they can contact me at the end. But it's no accident that Yonex is in the position that they are. Obviously, like you mentioned, players are. and I've always preached this to a lot of my players and upcoming players: play with a racket that's going to win you trophies. Don't worry about the $50,000 a year that you're going to get from a manufacturer, because if you start winning tournaments and grand slams, that money is going to come through the door faster than what any manufacturer can do to you. So, but Yonex is definitely, I would say, like golden standard, as Mark had mentioned before, as far as what we've seen come through and over years of dealing with. And it's cyclical, because Wilson was up, Babolat was up, now Yonex is up, but you got to have that product there to back it up.
How many players are playing, Curt, with a racket that's literally come off the shelf? Are any of the top 100, top 50?
That's a tricky question, because a lot of the factories now coming off, if you mentioned coming off the shelf, as if it came out from Yonex, if it comes from Yonex, sometimes Yonex will, for the top players, will do their in-house adjustments on it. So yeah, like all the players that are probably in the top 100, or maybe even outside top 100, the rackets that they're playing with, you probably can't get your hands on that particular racket as far as the weight and balances and stuff. Now, obviously, they're using the same mold, because it's pretty expensive to make a mold for a racket. But what they do to doctor it up, so to speak, some of them are getting it done at the factory, and then some will come to outside vendors like us, or whoever else is out there, like P1 or somebody who's doing the weight and balances and stuff like that. But for you, like I always have this question too. It's like, because I'm working with Tommy Paul and a couple followers I got. It's like, oh, can I get? You couldn't even play with Tommy's racket. You know what I mean? It's just like we always said that in the old days too. The racket that Roger had, if you put it in your hand, 99% of the recreational players couldn't probably hit with it. They would it would just be his racket, is what it was.
It's a brick.
Right. You wouldn't be able to do anything with it or have a decent game as far as playing tennis with it. But yeah, there's probably, I would say, not too many that are coming off the shelf, so to speak, and that you could have the exact same racket that's in a player's hands.
Okay. Mark, can you just give us some idea of how Magda is stringing, particularly now we're on the clay courts part of the year?
I think we've actually stayed quite steady with the tension we're at right now. We've sort of found a sweet spot for her in terms of the tension of around 20 kilos is working well for us. And Curt has advised us, actually, because we've also moved up from a 98 square inch racket to 100 about 3 months ago, which has definitely paid dividends. I think it's just a little bit easier for her. It's a little bit more natural power, bigger sweet spot. So I think she's, her results have picked up, and I think it's been in part due to that racket. So I think we've stayed pretty consistent with the stringing. We do tighten up a little bit if, like in Madrid, it's a little bit of altitude there, so we tighten up a little bit with the string. Or if we find, like here in Rome tomorrow, we play against Maria Sakkari. So if it's a very cold day tomorrow in the morning when we get up and it's very wet, then we may drop the tension a little bit just to help out getting a little bit more off the court with the help of the string. So yeah, we sort of stick around that 20 kilo mark, but I know there's a big range. And for me, it's been, and Curt can correct me if he disagrees, but I've felt that things have been trending downwards in terms of how tight people string. I look back when I played in college, I was stringing at 60 pounds. I mean, there's no way now that would be, I mean, not many people would be doing that, but I think people have realized that the game is, I don't want to say less about control, but it's certainly more about power than it ever was. And if you want more power, you've got to have some flex in the strings.
Yeah.
And that's all due to the changing of the strings, like from, when was stringing for Yvonne with all natural gut, him and Pete, they were like 72, 76 pounds when we were stringing rackets. And mind you, their head size was very small too.
Yeah.
So
wow.
It's very tight. Very tight strings, a different type of string. Obviously, the gut's a lot livelier, a higher tension, and a lot heavier racket. Which rackets are going lighter, strings are going to Paulie's, and the tensions are definitely going down. I did Monica Seles at 94 pounds when we were stringing.
What? 94 pounds?
She had 120, what was it? 120 inch Yonex frame, and it had Technofiber, which is now their NRG2, I believe, back then. But the string was so elastic and stretchy, had to pull it so tight. Yeah, it was 94. That was the highest I've ever done, was 94.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
How did you get in touch with Monica Seles? What a player she was, because she had, of course, a unique playing style.
She came to us through IMG because she was representative through IMG, and Warren Bosworth, my old boss, was very good friends with the owner of IMG, and we got a lot of our players through there. We had Yana Novotna and a bunch back in the day. Martina and everybody was coming through, and we got all those players. But she was awesome to work with. She was one of my favorites. I mean, I wish I could see a couple players today that had the drive and the attitude towards going to the court like she did. When she got on the court, there was hell to pay because she was going to give it out. And I'm like, I haven't seen that since her, probably, of somebody that intense on the court.
Wow. Why do you think that was?
I think it was her dad. Her dad had a lot to do with that, because obviously her upbringing and where she came from. And then I think, when she went to Balteri's, and Nick nurtured that a little bit better and got her to turn the corner, so to speak, and focus and put all that focus and energy onto the court, and to actually, I was amazed watching her slice up a court. She can go angle to angle, and she can put you anywhere on that court. And I think when Nick got a hold of her and taught her how to play tennis, that's when I would just wish she would have had a better, longer career, because she would be way up there in Grand Slams, I believe, if she
could be the greatest ever, couldn't she, on the women's side?
Close to it for sure.
Yeah.
So,
Mark,
you awake?
I think that's great for me. He's answered all my questions. Yeah, I've kept my eyes awake. I'm a good faker.
Well, I've got a few more questions. So you said that Ivan Lendl, Curt, was your first client. How did you get together? Was that through IMG as well?
No, that was Bosworth. When I started working at Bosworth, I worked there. I started working there in 1992, I think. And at that time, I think he was number 7 or 8 in the world. He was kind of, going down the ladder a little bit from his heydays. And went in, like I said earlier, they trained me how to string. Nate made me string one racket, I think 600 times before I could do anybody's racket.
600 times.
Prince White Spectrum for like 8 months straight. Every day I would string it like 5 times a day. I'll never forget that racket. I could probably string it with my eyes closed now. But he just came to me one day and said, "Here you go," and put Ivan's racket on the machine and said, "You're up." And I go, and I was like shell shocked basically. And I did it. It took me probably an hour and a half to do it, but I did it. But he goes, he just threw me to the fire, and that was the first pro I ever strung for, and I'm like, wow,
I bet you're really quick now, because I can do probably a racket, not obviously nearly as well as you, but probably in about 20-25 minutes. So how quick are you?
If I had to crank it up, I can get under 15 minutes. If I had, I did some tournament stringing with Nate up in Cincinnati before, and I've done stuff around here for a couple players who forgot to get their racket string, and I can spin the machine around pretty good. Obviously, I think I looked it up a year or two ago, my 10th anniversary on my business. I pulled over 4 million feet of string.
Oh,
over 70,000 rackets strung. So I don't know how I did it or where it went, but here I am.
Do you have I've started learning the guitar, and you get little bits in your fingertips from the strings. Do you have really manky fingertips?
Yeah, they've been like that forever. The one thing that gets chewed up pretty good is my fingernails on that, because unlike some of these stringers out here who like to use the what I call a sawed-off screwdriver to straighten the strings. I do. Warren taught me with my fingers, and I've done it from day one till now. I just can't use something to poke something into strings that I just did unless it's my fingers.
Yeah.
I gotta feel it. I gotta feel it and put it in there. So I can't do that. But yeah, my fingers and my, over 30 some years of string, and they're starting to feel a little bit of wear and tear.
I can imagine. Are you getting any calls from people who were in Madrid, who are in Rome, who are going on to Roland Garros? Are they calling you and asking advice? Are the coaches coming to you? Do you get that quite often?
No, I think pretty much like Mark, everybody gets a game plan at the beginning of the year of what's going to go down as far as going down to Australia and then coming back. We get, our local pros will come back through here after Australia and hit for a week or two, and then I can talk to them and then set them out for the clay. Everybody's here pretty much for Miami, so I'm in Miami. I'll spend a day in Miami and walk around and talk to some people.
Okay.
And then once this is like kind of my downtime when I can get these players out of here and go to Europe for 2.5 months, or hopefully 2.5, 3 months if they can win a couple Grand Slams, right, Mark? And stay open.
I'm working on that.
But no, usually I don't get a call off the road because the coaches are all up to speed at the level that we're dealing with it, that they can handle whatever is out there. Like Mark, with the tensions and stuff, he's knowledgeable. The coaches are all knowledgeable, and he's knowledgeable enough to do those kind of things. And we can advise them before that. Like, if you go to the grass, you're going to switch to certain things on the grass, like Yvonne did and stuff. And the string's going to be a little bit different, tensions and stuff before you even get there. What's going on with it. So, but
Ivan never won Wimbledon, did he? Was there quite a lot of conversation as to how to change the racket setup in order to take the All England crown?
I think at that point, I was obviously not around in his heyday that he was, winning everything, but was trying to win that. And I think in his thinking and being around him and knowing his mentality is he was ready to go anywhere and do anything to just get that title. And that's where the world that he was living in at that time, where he would definitely, try everything to possibly win it. I think a little bit desperation, because obviously when I was there, it was getting towards the end of his career. So he was like trying everything, and he would do that anyways. I mentioned before, he would play with Boris Becker's rackets all the time and wanted to see what Boris felt. Oh. He would do that. And then he would have us drill different patterns, open patterns, tight patterns. And he's very intrigued with, the racket and what can we do to make it better and what makes it worse. And he would always want to be pushing the envelope on that with the racket technology.
Whenever I'm at tournaments, I always go into the racket stringer. I love talking to them about what they're stringing with, what tension they're using. And I know a lot about the top 10, top 15, how much they're interested in the rackets. And I wondered from Mark and from you, Curt, if there's a big difference between the men's interest and the women's interests.
Yeah. I'll let Mark go. Go ahead, Mark.
It's tough for me to say because I haven't worked with the men. Really, I've done some here and there, but not a pro level. So I would, but based on my conversations with other coaches and people I know, obviously, day to day speaking, it's on that. I think it's more person to person rather than male female. I know a lot of girls that couldn't care less, and a lot of female players that really interested in every aspect of the equipment. And the same with some of the guys, very casual. They don't really mind. They're not paying that much attention to it. And others that are fastidious with how they operate.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with Mark on the same thing. I do find a little bit more that the men are in tuned, so to speak, with their string and their tensions. Most of the women that I deal with are, I could probably literally string it 2 or 3 pounds difference, and they wouldn't have an idea what's going on. But the men, for me, the men are a little bit more into. and it has to come into play with the strings they're using too, because a lot of men are using a hybrid gut too, where the women are not, that I'm dealing with, so that has a lot to play with it, that if they could feel it a little bit more than, and have a little bit more feel, what we say, than what a woman would have. So
Okay. All right, fair enough. I just know from speaking to a lot of people that someone like Alexander Zverev is very interested in every little part of his stringing job, and say Daniil Medvedev, very uninterested, kind of just sends the coach sends the rackets there and is not really bothered. And it's interesting always to know kind of who's paying attention to this. Was Andy Murray? You said he wasn't particularly interested, and perhaps Lendl got him more interested when they were working together.
I believe so. Obviously, I can't speak for before he worked with him, but when I worked with him in the off season down here, 3 years. Was on court with him and Yvonne, and I did stringing for him every day while he was here, and they were testing strings, the same thing. And he was very in tune to what we were doing, and I think him and Yvonne were on the same wavelength, and they understood where they wanted to go, and with the testing and everything. And it was very, very pleasing to work with people like that, because they knew what they wanted to try to get to, and they can convey it to me, and I can try to get it back to them the way that they wanted to, as far as testing different tensions and strings different ways, as far as the hybrid and different thicknesses on the strings and stuff like that. And they were going after one particular thing in his game and trying to make that string play into that. It was very layered, complicated of what they're trying to do, and I had to ride along with this and get inside their heads and try to figure it out. But it was good working with them. It gave me a lot of insight and knowledge of what some of these top players are looking for and what they're going after. And Yvonne can convey that, because he was there. He's done that and went through it. And I think that age group with Andy and everybody knows Yvonne and what he did and respects him. The younger crowd now that I'm dealing with, they don't even have a clue of who Pete Sampras or Lendl was. So It's kind of me to even bring up those names and say anything, because they don't have an idea. So.
And now Yvonne's working with Hubie Hurkacz. I saw them on your website, and I was interested to see how and if they've changed Hubie's setup from when he was working with Craig Boynton, who's a former Diary of a Professional Tennis Coach guest.
Yep. Yvonne, I got the call last fall. Yvonne called me and said, I'm working with Hubie. He's coming down. He's going to be in Boca for a month. So I strung for him every day. And I actually strung with, that's when he made a transition from the Yonex racket to the Wilson racket. And I was very pleased and excited when, speaking with Yvonne and his coach, that he wanted to make the move because he wanted to win trophies. and he wasn't all about, because obviously if he stayed, and they told me this, if he stayed with Yonex, he would have made a lot more sponsorship money than obviously what Wilson could offer him. But he felt playing with the Wilson that he had a better advantage of getting to his goals of winning, Grand Slams, which he eventually wants to get to. So I was in the middle of the transition of stringing the Wilsons with him, and also Wilson came down and worked with me. I've known the head of Wilson from back when I worked in Bosworth, 25 years ago. And so I'm friends with him, and, there was a good conversation going on, and it was nice that I could work with somebody that I had a history with and then could be on the same page with. But it worked out really good, obviously, with Yvonne and him, and Yvonne was very excited working with him, because Yvonne usually, doesn't get too excited, but he was excited working with Hubie, because Hubie was all in. He was just totally, a sponge with Yvonne, and Yvonne was giving it to him, and being on the court with them for a month was a great experience too. Same thing, working with Hubie. Great. Working with Hubie and those guys, and his whole, team was awesome. Those guys were great working with all them.
Very cool. Mark, anything to add?
No, I think it's been great for me, and the insights Curt has are great for people and I think it's such an underdeveloped, misunderstood area of tennis that people need to increase their knowledge. And I always tell other coaches, I think as a coach, we need to be knowledgeable in a lot of different areas: strength and conditioning, mental, psychology, nutrition, and this is a big one. Knowing, about rackets and equipment and these things. Not that we're going to be doing it necessarily ourselves, not so you know how to string a racket, but you need to be able to speak the language of the strength and conditioning coach, of the stringer, of the nutritionist, of the fitness. So it's for me really important.
Yep.
Yeah, Curt, just finally, would you be able to go on court, say with a player you haven't worked with, and automatically think this person needs to play with this particular racket, with this weight and balance, with this grip size, and with this string? Would it be that easy, given you've done this for 35 years?
It wouldn't be that easy. It would be the same thing as going into a doctor's office and then putting a pair of glasses on you and sending you out the door. Not actually doing something structural where you can sit because tennis is such a personal game that I always refer back to the big three. Look at the rackets that they had. They had a Wilson, they had a Babolat, and they had a Head. But they all were the greatest probably players of our generation, at least. Yeah. And their setups were totally different down the line. They're totally different people. So for me to go and say, okay, I'm going to give you this Babolat or this Yonex racket, and this is what you're going to play with, and you're going to be good and great at it. It's all test and tune, so to speak. You got to play with it. What do you like? What we would always want to know what was wrong with it, not what was right with it. Because once we know what's wrong, like if the ball's flying, okay, then we're going to go up into tension and bring it back in the court. We can reverse it and bring it back to where they need to be, instead of somebody trying to convey what's good about it. You can convey something that's not good about it faster than you can that's something that is good about it. And we would work on that angle of it. Okay, this isn't good, so we know which way to go now. We'll go this way with it, so to speak, like that. But I want to circle back to how I met Mark. I got a good story about this.
Oh, love that.
I've been working with Mark and Magda probably about four years now, right? Or something along that line. We're standing in a parking lot one day and we started talking about Bosworth. And little did we know, we were standing in the same room probably about 15, 20 years ago and didn't even know who each other was. But
that's true, huh?
The small circle comes back around that we ended up working back because he says, yeah, I used to go to Bosworth and pick up rackets all the time. And I'm like, I'm there every day. I don't remember seeing you, but obviously saw like 1,000 people. But
he's very memorable.
Yeah. Then we came back around.
Very easily forgettable, I was going to say.
Well, it's forgettable, but he should have remembered me because I'm the only guy that had long hair in the whole place. So that's remember.
It was just. I think what threw me off, Curt, was it was just a different color back then.
Yeah. hey, remember I've been in the industry for 35 years. So, Mark, how long? When's your birthday? Sorry.
Not that long. Not that long. I haven't been going.
Mark is a young pup. Curt, you've been so great to speak to. Thank you for all your knowledge. We've been running, if you're watching this on YouTube, how to get in touch with Curt, which is customtennisracket.com. He's on Instagram, Custom Tennis Racquets. And you are available if someone wants to come and ask you a couple of questions. That would be fine, Curt?
Yep.
Brilliant. And if you're in South Florida as well, you can perhaps pop into Curt's shop. Do you do that? Do you accept random tennis people?
I do, but we do everything out on the courts, or I obviously don't have a court here, so it's like I'll meet up with people around the area for sure, and we'll do stuff out on the courts. We'll go out on the courts with them for sure.
All right, amazing, Curt. Thank you so much for being our guest on Diary of a Professional Tennis Coach. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and we'll do it all again soon. Thank you for watching Diary of a Professional Tennis Coach. Please like, subscribe and share, and we'll be back soon with another great episode.